Amazon is engaged in some pretty frantic damage control right now, in large part due to this extraordinarily cringe superfan review of the Rings of Power trailer. It was so cringe that Amazon pulled it down and delisted it almost immediately. It is so bad that even the official LOTR on Prime Reddit is dragging it through the mud. When Reddit is looking at your thing and going, is this too woke? You have laid quite the goose egg, Amazon. My God. This is almost magical, but fear not, because of course the mainstream entertainment media will ride to Amazon's defense, trying to come up with anything and everything else to talk about. For you see, the history of fantasy is racialized, says a racial ideologue. A shocking surprise. Though, to be fair, I mean, I do believe this has been a somewhat common thread throughout modern day leftism. I remember this one funky fella in the 30s and 40s. He had this theory that people came from Atlantis, you see, and there was something about a master race and stuff, but enough about old school leftists. There are plenty of modern day lunatics to pick apart, and seeing as the Rings of Power is currently by far the most fiery, back to active battleground of the current day culture war, it's always good to point out your enemy's idiocy now, isn't it? Lord of the Rings series sparks debate over race. At least that is Sam Thielman's here take. Now, me and the rest of sane populace, we're looking at Amazon's current teasers and going, hold on there. You've got a dwarf princess, probably then, therefore, a direct descendant of Durin, without a beard, and she's black. See, you've got a trifecta there. It's not just her skin color that people are reacting to, because it's 2022. Race swaps is pretty much just par for the course these days, which incidentally is why Amazon really had to hammer that nail home to get the reaction they wanted to, rally useful idiots like Sam here. You've got a dwarf princess, right, that's strike one there, who's black, okay, that can't happen considering again the dwarven royal line, and who's beardless, and out of the three, that one is by far the worst. We can also of course talk about our grey elf, who's also obviously black, and has very short cropped hair, because once again, there's some communication going on back and forth here between Amazon and the rest of us, but you gotta read this. This is quite amazing. So, as the new Lord of the Rings series gears up for its September launch on Tolkien's Death Day, you might want to mention that, Sam, on Amazon, the company finds itself navigating treacherous, if familiar waters, and has already triggered a fierce debate over race. No, they've triggered a fierce debate over lore. Sam, pay attention here. I know it's difficult, but you gotta at least pretend to care. Because you see, there's a little bit of a problem here. There's a little bit of a problem here, you see. They may have spent a lot of money on a story famous for its cultish fans. Oh, The Lord of the Rings is famous for its cultish fans, is it? Some of whom are deeply enmeshed in the right-wing culture war industry. Ah yes, the Lord of the Rings fandom. And the right-wing culture war industry. Particularly rich coming from a Guardian writer, but oh well, details. Something to be said about not shitting where you eat, but never mind. Co-producer New Line Cinema, The Lord of the Rings of Power, isn't part of Peter Jackson's phenomenally successful Lord of the Rings and Hobbit movies, and by God does it show. But it is intended to capitalize on their success by ripping them off thoroughly. Here's another thing too. The Rings of Power is not intended to be a Lord of the Rings show, it's intended to be a Peter Jackson show, but with all of the extra steps that Peter Jackson, to his credit, decided to not include in his movies, as he went out from the very get-go to make a movie for the fans and for Tolkien, rather than for himself and his own political opinion. God, I miss the good old days. The new series will feature Saint Maud star Morfydd Clark as a younger version of Cate Blanchett Elvish Queen Galadriel, Benjamin Walker as heroic Elven King Gil-galad, and Maximum Baldry as human king-to-be Isildur, among many others, with his $465 million first season budget, making it the most expensive television show in history, and it's going to cost $1 billion over 5 seasons. I repeat this because, again, there are no accidents here, none whatsoever. The Lord of the Rings appendix are more of a show bible, the kind of notes you'd give a teleplay writers than a narrative of their own, referring of course to the things that Amazon actually have the rights to. So producers have woven their own stories of romance and palace intrigue into the book's timeline, fairy stories and genealogical footnotes. In other words, Amazon has created very expensive fanfiction, and you know what? There's nothing necessarily wrong about that. If you want to expand upon the setting, that's cool, and in fact Tolkien was open to that as well, so long as you expand on his universe. There's the key. Canon is canon for a reason. Without it, you don't have a setting. You can absolutely make new stories, and again, Tolkien encouraged that, but it is under the assumption that you are actually expanding upon the universe that already exists, rather than making your own for modern-day political reasons. That has allowed them to cast people of colour as some of the series' elves and dwarves, and there comes the modern-day politics being forced in. Like clockwork, really. Pleasing some of the book's fans, pleasing some of Amazon's shills, you mean? I said, because there are some people who are overjoyed at this, obviously, and all of them are rather corporatized. All of them are getting retweeted by Amazon accounts. Kind of reminds you of that incredibly cringe super fan reaction again. It's almost as if a part of that $1 million budget has gone into what do they call it again? Influencer marketing. Who knows? Just wild speculation, of course. On YouTube, the trailer for Rings of Power has 67,000 comments, and the overwhelming majority of them is evil cannot create anything new, it can only spoil and destroy what good forces invented and created. Ironically enough, Amazon started deleting all of those comments, so they started getting posted in every other language imaginable, which is a beautiful way to get around it too, mind you. In multiple languages, other were more blunt. Imagine spending millions of dollars to promote your woke social justice warrior garbage of a film. Spot on. Non-fans rolled their eyes at this, you see. Yes. South Park retroactively changed its sole black kid character name from Tolkien to Tolkien. The staple of the irreverent cartoon sense of humor. It is tempting to dismiss the complaining as the usual internet nerd rage. You mean the people who are actually, setting the trends, the people who are making the news, the people who are setting the narrative as The Guardian falls ever further behind to the point where they have to add in these little shills at the end. Our newspaper is dying, even with $1 billion of investment from market capitalists and other people who are just genuinely desperate to push money into failing ideologies. We just can't make the wheels keep going round. It's almost sad, really. But similar disputes played out when Action Color started taking new major roles in Star Wars products. Well, the primary outrage there was more the fact that they couldn't act rather than anything, Finn's character being about as deep as the average piss pool, but once more, details. But the conflict is also about the rise of two kinds of media empires. This is where it gets rich again. You see, there is Amazon, the crown jewel in Jeff Bezos' personal empire, and then there is YouTube, a place for every dork who likes to complain about pop culture and whose darker corners are a frequent haunt of racism and bigotry. I do love this current day narrative of the far left where they're, YouTube is the place that encourages these evil Nazis. As one of these evil Nazis of yours, I can tell you this much: YouTube doesn't encourage shit. We have to actively fight tooth and claw to even be recognized as a voice in a current day situation that tries to desperately silence us in every single way they can, merely for presenting what would be considered boilerplate conservative opinions just a few years ago, which is now far-right Nazism once more. Even though, and that's the hilarious part, we're the Nazis and the evil racists and bigots, whereas The Guardian is talking about history always being racialized. God damn it. The Horseshoe. Observable reality rather than, well, anything else. One group is populated by people who can afford to buy the rights to Lord of the Rings. Oh, one people is populated by rich corpo assholes. You are correct. And the other is populated by people who gives a shit about the Lord of the Rings. That's correct too. But for both, an incredibly amount of money and influence is at stake. That is correct too. The writer is actually beginning to sniff in the kind of the levels here. He's starting to realize, and make no mistake as well, just like we've understood that this is a very important fight that must be taken, the wokists know this as well. They can see their ground crumbling beneath them. They can actually, absolutely see the wave beginning to erode their little sandcastle, and they will do anything in their power to stop it. If you think being called racist and bigot was a bit passé 5 years ago, prepare yourself for quite the deluge in the near future, my boy. YouTubers complain about fan mistreatment. Oh, how dare they? How dare they side with the consumer? God, this is another one of those points. Back in the day, it was just a given. You always side with the customer over the multi-billion-dollar corporation, but, well, back in the days, have hundreds of thousands, sometimes millions of subscribers. Inevitably, these fans are devoted to movies, TV shows, and comics from their childhoods, and many are constantly on the watch for a new version that might expand the role of women, add characters of colours, or include characters who aren't straight. Ah yes, that's what we're on the watch for. It's not that we're constantly trolling the internet for good adaptations, or more of the things we love from our childhood. No. We're just looking for women to harass. God damn it. You can tell that they're getting desperate because they're writing as if this was 2005 again. When they're riled up, they can coordinate broad campaigns of harassment. Again, written from the mainstream news media. How many articles on this has The Guardian alone written, I wonder? The extremity of protest over the unrealistic presence of a black dwarf princess feels silly. Does it? Oh, never mind. You already know what the argument is going to be, don't you? Again, like clockwork, because it is the only one they have. The NPC update is in. Considering the stories themselves about wizards and magic rings and dragons, fantasy has fantasy elements, therefore nothing matters. Shoot me. Please, just shoot me now. Alright, let me make this point one more time, because I made it about 30 times, but might as well. A fantasy universe is a universe. It is a setting. It is an overarching setting. It has a life of its own. It is just as equal as our own world, except that it's fantasy. It has a canon. It has a reality. It has something that is set in stone. It has a basic principle, and every setting worth its salt has this. Every single solitary popular setting has that canon. Star Wars made the canon up wholesale. There was a tremendous hunger for more Star Wars, more backstory, more material. It spawned hundreds of source books and people desperately building a universe out of what was supposed to be kinda silly, adventurous action movies. That was the intent of Star Wars. It was never meant to be the gargantuan thing it is today, and the fans made that. Every single lunatic who makes the argument there is no canon because it can change is a brainlet, idiotic moron only fit to lick the boots of the actual creators. They're like, well, I see you've created a massive, enormous 10,000 page universe here, going down to the most minute detail. I can see that a man like Tolkien has dedicated his life to creating this, but well, I could just make up some fan fiction which would invalidate it all. Oh, aren't I a smarty boy? God damn, I hate it so much. I hate that entire argument, because This is the anti-fan position. Oh, I don't like this thing because it's not real. Okay. How about you go over there and enjoy your non-existent universe and leave these ones to us, you parasitic shithead? We go on, of course, to say that the history of fantasy is racialized because everything is racialized. It's 2022. Back in the 90s, none of this was a problem. We had literally achieved the post-racial society, but then the left came back in power and went, hold on a second. Black people are still inferior and need protection from us, their white saviors. She says people are used to seeing fantasy and fairy tales as all white, particularly in folk's medieval or magical medieval settings. And you know what? There's isn't actually a point, right? We're taking them out of the dream space. We're taking them out of how they imagine it could be, and so it feels off to them. She starts out good here, in that there is actually a point in that the majority of fantasy is white. Why? Because the majority of fantasy was written by white people for white people. That's simply the fact. And here's the thing too. I've made this argument before as well, but it bears repeating. What Amazon could have done with this $1 billion is invested in a tremendous writing team to make that black fantasy. What Tolkien did was look at English mythos and say to himself, this isn't really English anymore. There's nothing truly English, but far too much I've been affected by other outward sources. It's been watered down. We don't have that mythos of many other nations, and so I am going to make my goddamn own mythos. Amazon could do that. All of these creators bitching about racialization of current day properties could do that, but they don't wanna. They don't care, because they're not interested in telling the stories of black people, they're not interested in telling the stories of Africa, or the Middle East, or the many ridiculously rich universes and settings that do exist and are never explored. I recently rewatched the rather brilliant Shaka Zulu series from South Africa from 1987 or something, I think, and it is good. Like, it holds up today better than I remembered, and yet Shaka Zulu has one TV series. And already I can hear the lefty whingers going, why do you just mention him? Why don't you mention the other ones? Because he's by far the most well-known, and even he's only got one TV show. Amazon could absolutely make an epic around him. They could make epics around Dahomey, for example. They could make epics around the, the country that actually subjugated and enslaved and vassalized Dahomey. They could make epics about all of the cool-ass Ethiopian gods, like their bloody god of thunder. They could do this, but they don't want to. They want to claim what is already popular because, let me hear it, evil cannot create, only corrupt. Correct. And, speaking of corruption, we've of course also got the Norse prose era here, because, of course, if you're willing to go back to the poems, as you must understand here, that Sam is a Lord of the Rings scholar as well. He has carried out a 5-minute Google search, you see, or more correctly, he's probably read this on Twitter somewhere. Norse poems and eras that inspired Tolkien, you will definitely find characters who are not white, because they have the Svartalfar, black elves who live in Svartalfheim. Tolkien was a devotee of Old Norse prose and even translated many of them into English. Well, here's the thing, Sam. You're leaving some of the things out here, aren't you? Yes, you are. Because as a Norwegian, I know better than you what you're talking about here. There were two types of these, you see, the Svartalfar or Lysalfar, the light elves and the dark elves. Furthermore, the term elf here is very misleading because in Norse mythology, elves and dwarves are often used intermixed to mean the same thing. In fact, rather than calling them elves and dwarves, what you should be calling them in English would be closer to spirits, or elves in the more fairy-esque sense, as there were many different types, and they weren't necessarily the pointy-eared variants, or even the little guy variants, though they did exist. And here's the thing, since there were 2 of these, but you neglected the other part because you have an agenda to push, okay, so we've got the evil elves, the dark elves who live in Svartalfheim, and you've got the good elves, the light elves. Now, remind me again, the elves in Tolkien's The Lord of the Rings, the elves and dwarves, are they on the side of light or darkness? Good guys, huh? Okay. Well, is it then not reasonable to assume that he based them off the light elves, not the dark elves? Furthermore, the dark elves in Norse mythology are universally evil. So I guess you're saying that all black people in The Lord of the Rings need to be evil? Astoundingly woke of you. If anything, a more accurate interpretation of this would be... Wait for it. All right. What is it again? Orcs. That's what it is. Why? Because elves are orcs. Or more correctly, the orcs in The Lord of the Rings are supposed to be elves corrupted by the grand evil. They are fallen elves, tortured and broken. Again, that's where the quote comes from, that evil cannot create, only corrupt. But despite that, it's a fraught time to be adopting anything with even a hint of Norseness, because you see fascists once again are using Norse iconography publicly in lieu of more easily recognized swastikas and Confederate flags. Oh, so you're saying that people are using icons and you're annoyed by that because they BTFO'd you on Twitter, I guess? American European heritage groups are obsessed with Norse gods and runes. These groups are often violent, says the leftist. And when they rally behind a symbol, the people they target tend to turn away from it. Well, here's the thing. In fact, if Lord of the Rings wants to adapt lots of Norse runic iconography to make you turn away from it, I'm all on board. In fact, I might even forgive them for calling all black dwarves and elves evil by naming them Svartalfheim, but oh well. Some devotees are refusing to see their ground, arguing that such symbols of fantasy more broadly should be for everyone. Imagine that! White supremacists don't own Norse mythology. Clapping noises, even if some of them think they do, any more than they own the Bible or the US Constitution, wrote fancy Neil Gaiman on Twitter. Some people do have a sense of sense. Rare. In fact, despite its array of wizards, magic objects, warring races, and deep wells of mythology, The Lord of the Rings is a decidedly non-threatening tale, because, and we need to rewrite history here a little bit, fundamentally it is a comforting story of middle-class heroes of multiple races who triumph over enormous odds to save their way of life by working together as a common foe. Ah yes, middle-class heroes like Sam, a Baggins. Frodo a Baggins, who brings his manservant Sam on a journey. Middle class. Aragorn, middle class. Boromir, middle class. Legolas and Gimli. The anti-fan cannot help but reveal themselves. They just can't help it. They just can't help it. It's idiotic. And then we need to appeal a little bit to authority here. I don't think these books are fascist, wrote Michael Moorcock. Now, Moorcock has had a bit of a jealousy thing for Lord of the Rings for a while, and he once wrote a little article, which is cited here, Epic Pooh, referring to Winnie the Pooh, claiming that whilst they're good books and everything, they're too safe and bland. You need to have more modern-day politics in your setting, says Michael Moorcock. There's a reason why Tolkien is known by literally every single human being on the goddamn planet, pretty much, and Michael Moorcock is known to about 7 people. Most of them also do know, to be fair, that Games Workshop ripped off practically their entire idea of chaos for him. I'm not saying he hasn't done some good stuff, he absolutely has, but he is growing into more and more of those activist kind of people. So is it fundamentally disrespectful to do what Amazon has done by tearing apart and forcing their ideology into their setting? Well, this Guardian columnist thinks not. Why? Because Thomas here, who loves Tolkien, doesn't think so, and she points out that the notoriously restrictive Tolkien estate don't think so either, because they're busy selling out for millions and wanting big movie cash. I love it. Oh no, it's not a problem that they're violating the entire thing. Look at the Tolkien estate. They too are more concerned about getting money now that the last real Tolkien is dead, so therefore it's fine. You gotta wonder if these people realize they're evil, or if they've somehow managed to come up with enough mental gymnastics to jump over that hurdle. But, of course, it's also fine because it's not merely about being accurate, it has about authenticity, because race is an arbitrary construct after all. Race is not an arbitrary construct in Tolkien's word, neither is gender, by the way. Oh god. There's a reason why you need to e-beg constantly, Guardian. It is because you have become nothing more than a corporatist cum-rag, and Sam here is one of many such corporative slaves that happily march in lockstep to the sound of Mordor's drums, or Amazon in this case. As for the rest of us who would like to keep fantasy rather than a debate about racial issues, well, there's only one thing to do now, isn't there? So, fellow sons of Numenor and Alliance of the Good, the Fellowship of the Ring, the Defenders of Truth, Justice, and the Lord of the Rings way, we've got a long and hard struggle ahead of us, but you know what? With opposition like this, I'm feeling pretty goddamn confident, frankly. Until next time, I've been Arch. Thank you all very much for watching, and I hope to see you all again soon. Han god dag.